The kitchen in the modest Bozeman, Montana ranch house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the slow drip of the coffee maker. Lucas Harper, 24, adjusted his tie, his fingers trembling not from nerves but from a creeping unease. The air felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. His stepfather, Roy Dalton, 52, stood by the counter, pouring coffee into Lucas's travel mug, a sleek stainless steel one Lucas had bought with his first freelance check. "Drink up," Roy said, his voice smooth but edged, like a blade wrapped in velvet. "It'll settle those jitters. Big day today." The coffee's aroma hit Lucas, bitter, with a sharp, metallic tang that made his stomach twist. He forced a smile, his hazel eyes meeting Roy's cold gray ones. "Thanks," he said, keeping his tone light. "I'll take it to go." Lucas grabbed his portfolio, a leather binder stuffed with marketing mock-ups, and headed for the door. His mother, Ellen, a night shift nurse at Bozeman Health, was already at work, leaving just Lucas and Roy in the house. Roy leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his flannel shirt stretched over a frame hardened by years as a construction foreman. "Wouldn't want anything messing up that interview," he called after Lucas, his words laced with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lucas nodded, the mug's weight heavier than it should have been, and stepped into the crisp Montana morning. He had an hour before his interview at Big Sky Gear, the outdoor equipment company he'd idolized since high school. This was his shot. A marketing assistant role, a chance to turn his passion for design into a career. But Roy's presence lingered like a shadow, and that coffee smelled like trouble. At a gas station 3 blocks away, Lucas parked his beat-up Subaru and popped the mug's lid. The liquid was dark, too dark, with an oily sheen that caught the light. His hands shook as he poured it into the trash, watching it seep into discarded wrappers and soda cans. The smell clung to the air, chemical, wrong. His mind flashed to a moment 2 weeks ago, when he'd borrowed Roy's truck to jumpstart a friend's car. In the glove box he'd found an unmarked pill bottle, its label peeled off, filled with small white tablets. Sleep aids, he'd guessed, the heavy kind. He'd put it back, heart pounding, and said nothing. Now, as he stood by the trash can, the pieces clicked. Roy wasn't just disapproving of Lucas's career, he was sabotaging it. Lucas had always been cautious, but suspicion hadn't come naturally. Growing up, it was just him and Ellen in a cramped apartment on Bozeman's north side. His father had vanished when Lucas was 4, leaving only vague memories of cigarette smoke and a gravelly laugh. Ellen worked doubles to keep them afloat, her nurse's scrubs a constant in Lucas's childhood. When she met Roy 5 years ago during a hospital renovation project, Lucas, then 19, had been hopeful. Roy seemed solid, a contractor with a steady income, quick to fix a leaky faucet or take Ellen dancing at the local honky-tonk. "He's good for her," Lucas had told himself, ignoring the way Roy's compliments always carried a barb. "Smart kid like you," Roy would say, "you'll figure out colleges and everything, plenty of money in the trades." The cracks appeared when Lucas moved back home after graduating from Montana State with a marketing degree. The job market was brutal, and what he'd planned as a summer stay stretched into a year. Roy's demeanor shifted, his jabs sharper. When Lucas landed freelance gigs designing logos or social media ads, Roy would scoff. "What's that pay, $50? Real work's out there, not on your laptop." Ellen tried to mediate, her voice soft but tired. "Roy just worries you'll struggle, honey." He grew up with nothing, had to fight for everything, but Lucas saw the truth in Roy's eyes, a flicker of resentment, as if Lucas's ambition threatened his control over the house, over Ellen, over the life he'd carved out. The sabotage started small, subtle enough to pass as bad luck. Lucas's alarm would fail before a freelance pitch, the settings mysteriously reset. Files vanished from his laptop, entire folders of portfolio work gone. Wi-Fi dropped during Zoom interviews, leaving him scrambling to explain. Once, before a promising call with a Helena ad agency, he'd been hit with a stomach bug so bad he'd barely made it to the bathroom. "Tech's unreliable," Roy would say, shaking his head with mock sympathy. "World's a messy place." Lucas had doubted himself, chalking it up to stress or coincidence. But the coffee changed everything. Roy wasn't just hoping Lucas would fail, he was making sure of it. Lucas drove to a coffee shop near Big Sky Gear's office, his mind racing. He bought a plain black coffee, the familiar bitterness grounding him, and sat in his car replaying the morning. Roy's voice, too eager. The mug handed over with a predator's patience. The smell, like something from a chemistry lab. Lucas opened his portfolio but didn't look at it. Instead, he cataloged the past year, every accident, every smirk Roy had let slip, the time his car keys went missing before a networking event, the way Roy lingered when Lucas worked late, muttering about wasting time on pictures. It wasn't just disapproval. Roy saw Lucas as a rival, a threat to his hold over Ellen's attention, her money, her future. And today, with the biggest interview of Lucas's life, Roy had escalated. The realization hit like a punch. Roy wanted him stuck, dependent, under his thumb. Lucas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He thought of Ellen, her weary smile after a 12-hour shift, the way she'd hugged him when he got the Big Sky Gear interview. "I'm so proud of you," she'd whispered, while Roy, washing dishes, had muttered, "Don't get your hopes up." Lucas had heard them argue that night, Ellen's voice sharp through the wall. "Why can't you support him?" Roy's reply, low and cold. "He needs to grow up, not chase fantasies." Lucas had lain awake, the truth dawning. Roy wasn't just undermining him. He was trying to break him. At Big Sky Gear's sleek office, Lucas sat in the lobby, his portfolio on his lap, the new coffee steadying his nerves. The receptionist smiled, and he returned it, feeling a fire he hadn't known was there. This wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about proving Roy wrong, about reclaiming his future. When the marketing director, a woman with a no-nonsense ponytail, called his name, Lucas stood, his shoulders square. The interview was a blur of confidence, his mock-ups for a fall campaign, bold ideas for social media, answers that flowed without hesitation. "Why Big Sky Gear?" the director asked. Lucas leaned forward, his voice steady. "Because your brand tells stories, real people, real adventures. I want to help you tell them better." She nodded, impressed, and Lucas knew he'd nailed it. 3 hours later, driving home with a job offer and a start date, Lucas felt lighter, like he'd shed a weight he hadn't known he was carrying. The salary was solid, benefits kicked in after 90 days, and the team had loved his vision. He was already planning for an apartment, moving out, building a life Roy couldn't touch. But as he pulled into the driveway, the high faded. The house was too quiet, the air thick with something wrong. He stepped inside and froze. Roy was sprawled on the couch, a bucket between his knees, his face pale and slick with sweat. The travel mug, Lucas's mug, sat empty on the coffee table, a faint powdery residue in its rim. Roy looked up, his eyes glassy but sharp with something like fear. "You're back," he croaked, wiping his mouth. "How'd it go?" "Got the job," Lucas said, his voice flat, his eyes on the mug. "Start Monday." Roy's face twitched, surprise, then a flicker of something darker. He bent over the bucket again, retching. Ellen rushed in from the kitchen, her nurse's instincts kicking in, her face etched with worry. "Lucas, you're home! They offered you the job?" She hugged him, her pride cutting through the tension. "On the spot," Lucas said, forcing a smile, his gaze still on Roy. "What's wrong with him?" Ellen glanced at Roy, her voice low. "Not sure. Started this morning, right after you left. Food poisoning, maybe. He's been like this all day." "All day," Lucas echoed, the pieces snapping into place. Roy, alone in the kitchen, must have sipped from the special blend he'd made for Lucas, too arrogant or careless to realize what he'd done. Lucas's heart pounded, not with triumph, but with a cold clarity. Roy hadn't just tried to sabotage him. He'd poisoned himself with his own trap. Ellen fussed over Roy, but Lucas saw the truth in the mug's residue, in Roy's trembling hands. This wasn't over. Roy's game had backfired, but men like him didn't quit. Lucas met Roy's eyes, a silent vow passing between them. He'd won today, but the real fight was just beginning. Lucas Harper sat in his childhood bedroom, the Bozeman moonlight spilling through the window, casting jagged shadows across the half-packed boxes. The job offer from Big Sky Gear was his lifeline, a marketing assistant role, a chance to escape the suffocating grip of his stepfather, Roy Dalton. But the victory felt fragile, overshadowed by the image of Roy, pale and retching, undone by the poisoned coffee he'd meant for Lucas. The travel mug, now tucked in Lucas's desk drawer, was evidence, a silent witness to Roy's betrayal. Lucas's heart raced not with fear, but with a burning resolve. Roy hadn't just tried to sabotage his interview, he'd waged a quiet war against Lucas's future. And now, Lucas saw it all, the reset alarms, the deleted files, the stomach bug before a key call. Roy wasn't just disapproving, he was dangerous. Downstairs, the house was still. Ellen at her night shift, Roy likely asleep after his day-long sickness. Lucas's phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "So proud of you, Lucas. Call me tomorrow." He smiled, but the warmth faded as he thought of her, caught in Roy's web. Ellen, with her nurse's compassion and endless work ethic, deserved better than a man who saw her son as a threat. Lucas opened his laptop, pulling up his savings account. He had enough for a deposit on a studio apartment near Big Sky Gear, a move he'd planned in secret. But Roy's actions weren't just about him. They were about control over Lucas, over Ellen, over the life they'd built. Lucas's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He couldn't leave his mother blind to the truth, not after today. The next morning, Lucas found Ellen in the kitchen, her scrubs wrinkled from a 12-hour shift. Roy was out, running errands, giving Lucas the opening he needed. He set the pill bottle from Roy's truck on the table, its unmarked surface gleaming under the fluorescent light. "Mom? We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but heavy. Ellen's brow furrowed as she sat, her hands wrapping around a mug of tea. Lucas recounted the coffee incident, the metallic smell, Roy's sickness, the residue in the mug. He listed the sabotage, the alarms, the files, the Wi-Fi failures, the sudden illness before a job prospect. Then he slid the pill bottle toward her. "I found this in his truck weeks ago. Same pills were crushed in that coffee." Ellen's face paled, her fingers tightening on the mug. "Lucas, that's a serious accusation. You're sure?" He nodded, pulling out his phone to show a photo of the mug's residue, the oily sheen unmistakable. "He drank it himself, Mom. That's why he was sick all day. He thought it was for me." Ellen's eyes darted to the bottle, then back to Lucas, a flicker of doubt giving way to something harder, realization. "There's more," Lucas said, his voice softening. "Have you checked your retirement account lately? Or your savings?" Ellen frowned, confused. "Roy handles the bills, says it's less stress for me." Lucas leaned forward, his heart aching for her. "I saw a bank notice last month. Your account was overdrawn. You're the most careful person I know. That's not you." Ellen stood, pacing, her nurse's calm cracking. He wouldn't. But her voice wavered, and Lucas saw the truth dawning. She grabbed her phone, logging into her bank app with shaking hands. Minutes later, her breath caught. $22,000, she whispered, her eyes wide. "Gone. Small withdrawals over 3 years, some with my signature, but I never signed those." Lucas's stomach churned. Roy hadn't just targeted him. He'd been bleeding Ellen dry, forging her name to fund his own life. New tools, fishing trips, cash he flashed without explanation. "He's been stealing from you," Lucas said, his voice thick with anger and grief. "And he's been trying to keep me here, under his control, so I wouldn't notice." Ellen sank into a chair, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I thought he loved us," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought he was protecting us." Lucas knelt beside her, taking her hand. "He loves control, Mom. He sees me as competition. For you, for your money, for this house. We're in his way." Ellen's sobs grew quiet, her face hardening with a resolve Lucas hadn't seen in years. "What do we do?" she asked. Lucas squeezed her hand. "We fight. Together." That day, Ellen called the bank, opening a new account and freezing the joint ones. She made an appointment with a divorce lawyer, her voice steady as she booked it. Lucas, meanwhile, drove to a small apartment complex near Big Sky Gear, signing a lease with a deposit he'd saved. The studio was tiny, but it was his, a fortress Roy couldn't breach. By evening, Roy was back, his face still drawn, but his demeanor wary. He sensed the shift, his eyes flicking between Lucas and Ellen at dinner. "Heard you got the job," he said, his tone forced. "Moving out already?" Lucas met his gaze, unflinching. "Signed a lease today, out by the weekend." Roy's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. his fork scraping the plate. Ellen, her eyes red but fierce, stayed silent, her new bank card hidden in her purse. After dinner, Lucas slipped into the garage, placing a folded note in Roy's toolbox. "What you tried to destroy didn't break." He didn't sign it. Roy would know. 3 weeks later, Lucas stood in Big Sky Gear's conference room, presenting his first campaign pitch, a rugged, heartfelt ad series for their winter line, built on real customer stories. The marketing director beamed. "This is exactly what we hired you for, Lucas. You're leading this one." Pride surged through him, but it was bittersweet. Back at his apartment, a bare but hopeful space with a second-hand couch and a view of the Bridger Mountains, Lucas called Ellen. "How's it going, Mom?" he asked, hearing the clink of dishes in the background. Her voice was strong, a far cry from the broken woman of weeks ago. "Filed for divorce Monday," she said. "Bank's investigating Roy's withdrawals. They found forged signatures on 12 slips, and they found pills in his truck, not prescribed to anyone." Lucas's breath caught. "He's done?" Ellen's voice hardened. "Police arrested him this morning. Fraud, possession of controlled substances. He's out on bail, but he's not coming back here. I'm staying with Aunt Clara in Livingston for now." Lucas closed his eyes, relief and sorrow crashing together. "You're free, Mom." She laughed, a sound both fragile and fierce. "So are you, Lucas. You showed me how." Tears pricked his eyes, not for Roy's fall, but for the woman who'd raised him, who'd found her strength in his fight. He thought of the workers at Big Sky Gear, their camaraderie, a new kind of family. He thought of the customers whose stories he'd tell, the mountains he'd hike, the life he was building. Roy had tried to poison his dreams, but he'd only fueled Lucas's fire. 6 months later, Lucas stood on a ridge overlooking Bozeman, the Gallatin Valley glowing under a twilight sky. His campaign had launched to rave reviews, his name now known in the office as a rising star. Ellen had moved to Missoula, opening a cozy coffee shop called Ellen's Brew, her lifelong dream funded by the recovered savings and divorce settlement. She'd sent Lucas a photo that morning, her and Aunt Clara grinning outside the shop, a sign reading "Grand Opening." Lucas had framed it, a reminder of their shared victory. Roy, Lucas heard, had taken a plea deal, probation, restitution, and a one-way ticket to a construction job in Idaho. He was a ghost now, a cautionary tale. Lucas pulled the old travel mug from his backpack, its weight a final tether to that morning. He set it on a rock, the metal glinting in the fading light, and turned away. As he hiked down the ridge, the wind carried a whisper of freedom. Roy had meant to break them, but he'd only forged something stronger, a mother and son, unbound, building lives that shone brighter than his darkness could ever touch. Lucas Harper stood in his new studio apartment, the Bozeman skyline twinkling beyond the window, a quiet testament to the life he was building. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the crisp Montana air, and the sparse furnishings, a thrift store couch, a folding table, felt like a kingdom. His first paycheck from Big Sky Gear was framed on the wall, not for the money, but for what it meant. Freedom from Roy Dalton's shadow. The note he'd left in Roy's toolbox, "What you tried to destroy didn't break," echoed in his mind, a silent vow kept. Roy was gone, arrested for fraud and drug possession, his grip on Lucas and Ellen shattered. But the scars lingered, and Lucas knew the fight wasn't just about escaping. It was about rebuilding, proving that Roy's poison couldn't taint the future. 3 months had passed since the confrontation that changed everything. Ellen's discovery of Roy's theft, $22,000 0 cents siphoned from her retirement fund, had lit a fire in her, transforming her quiet endurance into fierce resolve. She'd frozen their accounts, filed for divorce, and moved to her sister's house in Livingston, leaving Roy to face the consequences alone. Lucas, now settled in his apartment, was thriving at Big Sky Gear, his winter campaign pitch earning praise and a promotion to lead the project. Yet, as he unpacked a box of old photos, him and Ellen at his high school graduation, her smile weary but proud, he felt a pang. They'd survived Roy, but survival wasn't enough. They deserved to live, to reclaim the dreams he'd tried to steal. The turning point came on a snowy December evening, Lucas was at his desk, sketching ad concepts, when Ellen called. "I'm in Bozeman," she said, her voice bright but nervous. "Can I come by?" An hour later, she stood in his apartment, her coat dusted with snow, holding a folder. "I've been thinking," she said, setting it on the table, "about what I want next." Lucas opened the folder, his eyes widening at the business plan inside. A cozy coffee shop, Ellen's Brew, to be opened in Missoula. "It's been my dream since I was your age," she said, her voice trembling. "Roy said it was foolish, but I'm done listening to him." Lucas's throat tightened, tears pricking his eyes. He saw her not as the tired nurse who'd raised him alone, but as a woman ready to rise. "You're doing it," he said, pulling her into a hug. "And I'm helping." Over coffee, plain, safe, from Lucas's cheap machine, they mapped out the plan. Ellen had recovered most of her savings through the bank's fraud investigation, enough to lease a small storefront. Lucas offered to design the shop's logo and marketing, his skills a gift to the woman who'd given him everything. But the conversation turned deeper, to the wounds Roy had left. "I should have seen it sooner," Ellen said, her eyes distant. "The way he controlled us, pitted us against each other." Lucas shook his head. "He fooled us both, Mom, but we're free now." Ellen's hand found his, her grip strong. "Because of you, Lucas. You saw the truth first." Tears fell, not from pain, but from the weight of their bond, forged in the fire of Roy's betrayal. The next weeks were a whirlwind. Lucas threw himself into Big Sky Gear's campaign, his ads, raw, authentic stories of hikers and climbers, resonating with customers and executives alike. At night, he worked on Ellen's Brew, crafting a logo of a steaming mug against a mountain sunrise. Ellen, meanwhile, navigated the divorce with a lawyer who'd taken one look at Roy's forged withdrawal slips and promised a swift settlement. Roy, out on bail, had tried to call Ellen, alternating between apologies and threats. She blocked his number, her resolve unshaken. When the police found more evidence, unprescribed sedatives hidden in Roy's truck, matching the residue in Lucas's mug, the case escalated. Roy took a plea deal, 3 years probation, $20,000, 0 cents in restitution to Ellen, and an order to leave Montana. He vanished to Idaho, a broken man, his name a whisper in Bozeman's gossip. Lucas's apartment became a hub of new beginnings. Ellen visited often, bringing blueprints and dreams, her laughter filling the space Roy had once poisoned. One night, as they pored over paint swatches for the coffee shop, Lucas pulled out the travel mug. "I kept it," he said, turning it in his hands, "to remind me how close I came." Ellen's face softened, but her voice was firm. "You didn't just survive, Lucas. You fought. For both of us." She took the mug, setting it aside. "Let it go. We've got better things ahead." Lucas nodded, a weight lifting. The mug wasn't his story anymore. His story was the campaign launching to applause, the shop taking shape, the mother and son who'd turned betrayal into triumph. By spring, Ellen's Brew opened in Missoula, a warm space with wooden tables and mountain views. Lucas stood at the grand opening, watching Ellen greet customers, her smile radiant. She'd hired a barista, a young woman escaping her own rough past, and Lucas saw his mother's heart, always giving, always healing. He'd designed the shop's flyers, and they were everywhere, drawing a crowd that spilled onto the sidewalk. A local paper ran a story, "Nurse Turns Dream into Reality," with a photo of Ellen and Lucas, arms around each other. Lucas framed it, hanging it beside his Big Sky Gear paycheck. "You're a natural," he told her, sipping a latte she'd made. Ellen laughed, her eyes bright, learned from the best. Lucas's own star was rising. Big Sky Gear promoted him to marketing coordinator, his campaign boosting sales 15%. He hiked the Bridger Mountains on weekends, the trails a reminder of why he loved his work, connecting people to the wild. But the true victory was quieter, deeper. One evening Ellen called, her voice thick with emotion. "I found something," she said, "in the divorce papers. Roy wrote a letter, said he was sorry, that he was scared of losing me to you." Lucas listened, waiting for anger that never came. "He lost anyway," he said. "We won." Ellen's laugh was soft, healing. "We did, didn't we?" On a clear summer night, Lucas climbed to a ridge above Bozeman, the valley below a sea of lights. He thought of the coffee, the pills, the note in the toolbox. He thought of Ellen, pouring her heart into her shop, and himself, building a career that mattered. Roy had meant to break them, to keep them small, but he'd only made them stronger. Lucas's eyes stung, not with sorrow but with gratitude, for his mother's courage, for his own resilience, for the bond that had carried them through. The lessons were etched in his soul. Trust your instincts, lean on those who love you, and never let a manipulator define your worth. Victory wasn't loud, it was the quiet of a shop opening, a campaign succeeding, a family reborn. He pulled a small stone from his pocket, one he'd picked up the day he moved out. It wasn't the mug, heavy with Roy's betrayal, but a symbol of the ground he'd claimed. He set it on the ridge, a marker of where he'd been and where he was going. As he descended, the stars above seemed brighter, guiding him home to a life he'd fought for, a life no one could take away.